Sharath Hari is a vice president leading Everest Group's human resources and talent practice. In this role, he assists clients, including outsourcing models and HR tech, on developing go-to-market strategies, value propositions, thought leadership assets, and competitive intelligence. Varun Malik is a practice director leading contingent staffing, candidate engagement and experience, and skills and intelligence platforms research. In this role, he advises service providers and technology platforms on go-to-market strategy, peer assessment, market assessment, M&A target identification, and more. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Sharath.
Hey everyone, hi Varun, nice to be doing this webinar with you. So today we're going to be discussing three important topics around skills, right? Why organizations need to consider a skills-based transformation. And if they do decide to embark on this path, what are the challenges they might encounter? And lastly, the important question is, what should they do to overcome these challenges, right? So Varun, to kick things off, first question to you, why do you think organizations should consider becoming skills-based? What are some of the insights from your conversations with many HR and business leaders?
Sure, thanks. Thanks a lot, Sharath, for that question. So, what we have observed, Sharath, over the last few years is that the overall talent landscape has significantly evolved, right? So this evolution of talent landscape kind of, picked a lot of speed post-COVID pandemic. And what we are seeing is that, we are living through an era where technological advancements are happening at a very fast pace, or, at least how I would call it as it is happening at an unprecedented speed, right? So there are a lot of emerging technologies that are, out there in the market. These emerging technologies such as AI, machine learning, IoT. So they are transforming the way we are working, right? So this is why, it's becoming very critical for organizations to constantly innovate so that they can, incorporate these evolving technologies. Now, the fundamental, issue is that, as the technology in the market evolves, right? So the workforce must also continue to evolve at the same pace, right? So this makes training and development, no longer a one-off event, right? If you think of it like a decade back or, more than 2 decades back, training and development were more like one-off events happening quarterly or semi-annually. But now, because of this rapid technological transformation, the training and development have become a continuous ongoing process, right? So another point that, I would want to highlight here is that, there is employee experiences that is gaining a lot more importance, right? So the reason why it is gaining a lot of importance is that a positive employee experience makes people, more engaged with their work, right? It makes them more productive. And at the end, it can help companies, achieve their goals and become more innovative in the field of work that they are doing. Right. What we have observed is that, Sharath, unfortunately, many companies are still using some of the disconnected HR processes or, some of the siloed HR processes, and that is negatively impacting the overall employee experience. Right. So the organizations, they have also implemented some of the complicated systems, right, in terms of process, in terms of technology. Now, these systems are also causing a lot of inefficiencies and they are slowing down the way, the organizations are working. Right. So lastly, another thing that we are observing is that, the nature of workforce is also very rapidly evolving. Right. So the today's workforce, if you look at it, is much more tech savvy, right? So they prefer working in an alternate or a not so traditional employment models, right? So they prefer working in a, let's say, gig worker construct or a contingent worker construct or a freelancers, right? So this is also giving, rise to alternate talent models. Again, giving a challenge to organizations on how they can manage these innovative talent channels as well. Right. So due to the plethora of challenges that I've discussed, right? So the traditional, talent acquisition and talent management models are no longer adequate. right? So hence, at least we believe that, organizations, who are using these traditional models, they are facing a lot of challenges, right? So the next slide talks about some of the challenges that, that are being faced by such organization, right? So the biggest challenge, that we discussed based on our conversation with a lot of enterprises is around talent scarcity or talent availability, right? So as I discussed earlier, right, the talent market is continuously evolving, right? So there are several skill categories where we have a significant talent demand and supply gap, right? So this is happening because the shelf life of skills are reducing, right? So let's say, a decade back, the shelf life of a programming skill like Java was maybe, 5 or 6 years. But now, a shelf life of a new age skill that has gone down significantly, right? So organizations are finding it even more difficult to fill in these critical roles to traditional approaches of talent acquisition and talent management. And the irony is that all this is happening when we are in an economic slowdown, where the number of people who are looking for work is much more than the job opportunities. So that's the biggest challenge that the organizations are facing, right? So other challenge that comes to my mind is more around talent experiences. I talked about it a bit in the previous slide as well, right? So talent experiences are failing to meet the expectations of the talent. And one of the possible reason that we figured was it could be around misalignment with the organization's goals, right? So inaccurate workforce planning, again, it's another issue which can compound the overall issue. And what is happening is in this rapidly changing environment, traditional approaches of HR and talent, they leave organizations unprepared, to meet the market demands, right? So the way market is evolving at this point of time. So sometimes there is certain demand of a particular skill categories, and sometimes there is a slowdown. So the organizations need to have that agility that they can, that they're able to scale up or scale down their talent acquisition and talent management needs accordingly, right? So at an overall level, there are several challenges that we are witnessing organizations are being facing because of their traditional HR and talent related processes, right? So a natural question, that comes in mind is, okay, these are the challenges, right? So what is the solution? Right. So one of the solutions that we have been discussing internally and talking a lot about it is around skills, right? So how you can reimagine your overall talent acquisition and talent management practices, right? So it can be done by making skills as a centerpiece or making skills as a single source of truth and having all the HR and talent processes revolve around the skills. But before we get into the details of how to do that, what could be the challenges associated with skill-based transformation, I think we have our first poll question, right? So the first question that we have is around, how familiar are you with this concept of skill-based organizations, right? So we have been discussing a lot of challenges that are out there in the market, which organizations are facing because of these traditional, talent management, talent acquisition practices. So how familiar, you are with these practices? We'll take a quick, 1 minute to gather the responses, but looks like, most of the people are somewhat familiar, right? So I can see, I think more than 75% of the respondents are very familiar or somewhat familiar with this particular concept. Okay. Yeah, so now I think like we have already discussed, right, that most of you people are fully aware or partially aware about the concept of skill-based organization, right? So now let's get into some specific of it, right? So before we get into the specifics, right? So Sharath, I have a question for you. So, this concept of skill-based organization, this has gained a lot of tractions in last 2 years, right? So maybe 3 years, right? So can you talk a little bit about what exactly is this concept, and, why do you think this concept have suddenly started gaining traction?
That's right, Varun. If you look at skills and skills-based organization topics, right? So it's not new, right? in our conversations with leading enterprises and HR and business leaders, few enterprises have been leveraging skills as a foundational element for many years, right? Albeit at a smaller scale within their organizations, right? But like you mentioned, over the last 2 to 3 years, this topic is really picking up, right? And the reason why that is happening is because of many reasons, right? One is, like you mentioned, the increasing talent scarcity. It is making organizations to look at methods or new way to, get the right skills at the right places, right? The second one is the benefits of skills-based approaches are clear, right? Previously, there was a lot of skepticism and lack of proof points. Now there are enough organizations that have made progress in this journey, and they're willing to share their learnings and best practices with a larger community as well, right? The third key reason would be, the advancements in technology is enabling organizations to succeed in this transformation, right? We see a community of purpose-driven HR tech providers, right? So trying to address various skills-related challenges, right? But still, let's take a finer look at, why there is more focus on skills, right? So based on our conversations with enterprise leaders and based on our research, this particular approach of leveraging skills as a foundation element benefits both enterprises as well as individuals, right? Broadly speaking, what an enterprise wants to understand is, where can I get the best talent at the best cost on a sustainable basis? Some follow-up questions to this could be, hey, do I hire from outside? Can I leverage people within my organization through internal mobility? Or if I've identified some people to be staffed on a particular project, can I provide some training to them to make them fit for this role, right? Similarly, from an employee's perspective, right? One of the key things that they would want to understand is, what is the best career path for me going forward? Do I continue to be in the field that I'm in right now? Do I shift to an adjacent domain, right? So essentially what we're trying to say is, a skills-based approach benefits both the enterprise as well as individual if it is used in the right way and across the organization, right? Now, this is a very high-level representation, but a skills-based approach helps you look at the individuals in more depth, right? And helps organizations understand their workforce better as a whole, right? Having said that, skills is just one part of the puzzle, right? Recently, I was listening to a webinar where a senior leader from Johnson & Johnson mentioned that in addition to skills, they looked at 3 more parameters, right? Those were experience, aspirations, and traits of the individual or the candidate or the employee, right? So only when you look at this 4-dimensional approach, you can really understand someone's true potential, right? It just reemphasizes the fact that while skills is critical, it's not the end game, right? So what is a skills-based organization, right? It might be looked at as an ideal state or aspirational state for a lot of organizations, right? It is always a journey. It's never the destination, right? You can never become a truly skills-based organization. But a truly skills-based organization is where skills is used as a fundamental lever across all the processes across the hire to retire lifecycle, right? For example, think of a skills-based organization as a finely tuned orchestra, where each instrument represents a different HR process: talent acquisition, learning, mobility, performance, and so on and so forth, right? And the conductor can be the skills engine or the skills ontology, that orchestrates the harmony by bringing out the best in every process, creating a symphony of efficiency and excellence, right? So by understanding the skills of each employee, candidates, organizations can make the right data-driven decision, providing the right experiences for them in terms of learning, succession, mentorship, and place the right people in the right places that suits their skill sets and aspirations. Now, one of the most important parts of this approach is the skills framework in the center, right? It's a broad term we have used to cover a lot of different components needed to make this approach really successful, right? And we'll get into it right now, right? So from our conversations with clients, skills ontology, skills engine using APIs are one of the first things that come to their mind when they're thinking of becoming a skills-based organization, right? While they're a critical piece and a must-have for everything to work seamlessly, these two alone can't help organizations make the approach fruitful, right? For example, skills inferencing and validation is something that is ever so crucial in these approaches, right? Without accurate and validated data about the skill sets of the employees and candidates, the entire process can go haywire. The other critical element that organizations are investing to solve is around skills harmonization and orchestration. Due to the numerous HR tools that organizations have bought, and many times each tool will come with its own skills taxonomy and nomenclatures, right? It's difficult for organizations to have a single and central skills hub across the organization. In addition to this, employee skill data are also spread across these applications and may be different in different systems as well. So there needs to be a way to harmonize the skills data across the different systems and have an orchestration mechanism by which the right and central data is used in decision making. This is also where skills data management and governance also plays a critical role. Having a solid understanding of how the data needs to be updated, deleted, where it should be used, who should own it, what should be the role of HR, IT, business, everything needs to be clear, right? Now, moving on to the second part of the discussion today, right? This is again the second question for you, Varun. What are some of the challenges that you've heard organizations face when they embark on this journey?
Yeah, sure, Sarath. So I think we have been discussing a lot about, some of the benefits. Let's discuss the other side of the coin, right? So we do agree that, more and more organizations are realizing that focusing on skills is becoming very critical to manage and hire talent in the future, right? So this approach is definitely something that has great potential, but like Sharath mentioned, there are some challenges that are associated with it, and then organizations need to be prepared to face these challenges, right? So the first challenge that we have is around technology and data, right? So when we talk about technology and data, we refer to the infrastructure that is needed to support this particular new approach, right? So organizations, they are not only required to establish a robust skills ontology, right? So like Sharath mentioned, they also need to continuously evolve and update this skill ontology. And this evolution and updation happens as and when the market evolves, right? So to establish the skills ontology, right? So organizations need to clearly define and categorize these skill categories, right? So now establishing the skills ontology is one part of the equation, right? So another critical part of the equation is integrating it into your existing HR technology ecosystem and the processes that you have. This currently poses a lot of challenges for the organizations trying to undergo a skill-based transformation, right? So the problem here is that organizations already have a very sophisticated tech stack in place, right? So they have an HCM, they have significant number of point solutions catering to specific needs. right? So making sure that, these systems are able to communicate effectively with this new skill-based model, this will require a very careful planning and a very careful implementation. So that's another challenge which the organizations are facing, right? So these are some of the foundational challenges that we have, right? So when the foundation is in place, right? So the next challenge that we have is operational, or how do we get started, right? So embedding skills in a day-to-day operation requires a very thoughtful planning and a clear strategy from the leadership, right? So organizations are expected to allocate a dedicated resources, and some of the new roles and responsibilities of employees are expected to evolve across the organization, right, as they embark on this skill-based transformation. And lastly, the last challenge is probably the biggest challenge that we have out there, is around the change management, right? So one of the biggest hurdles that we have witnessing in terms of adopting a skill-based approach can be, leadership alignment and driving the cultural change. So when we say leadership alignment, we mean, having all those necessary buy-in from the senior executives and leadership, right? So the idea here is that, leadership must be completely on board, and they should be ready to drive this change, right? So this will require buy-in at every level, right? So it can mean buy-in from executives, buy-in from frontline managers, and even the CXOs. So on an overall level, these are the broad challenges that, the organizations are facing while they're undergoing a skill-based transformation. Now, another interesting concept that I wanted to highlight here is that, becoming skill-based organizations, though we do understand is crucial, right? It is clearly not enough. Why do we say that, right? So what we have seen is that people generally refer skills to as currency of talent, right? So now we do understand that skills are critical, but skills are not the entire picture or the full picture, right? So it is not the only way to measure talent's capabilities, right? So truly understand, an employee's or a candidate's capabilities or their value, organizations have to look beyond their skills, right? So when I say look beyond skills, they need to look beyond technical and soft skills, right? So these additional elements can include creativity, emotional intelligence, being cultural fit, etc., right? So these qualities, help people work together, right? These qualities help people, solve problems and maybe innovate as an organization, right? So the point here is that, someone, let's say, who has great technical skills, who has great soft skills, right, but lacks an ability to connect with others and think creatively, right? So their impact in an organization may be limited compared to someone who, might not have that great technical and soft skills, but on the other aspect, the person has really good capabilities. So that's another caveat that I wanted to highlight here. And then another key issue with, just focusing on skills is that, skills are becoming outdated very fast and very quickly, right? So in the beginning, we were discussing, how rapidly the skills landscape is evolving, right? The shelf life of skills are reducing very, very rapidly, right? So this is happening due to, technological advances or industry evolution, right? So right now the situation is that, talent is not just about what someone knows right now at this point of time, right? So it is also about the ability to learn and adapt to change. In other words, it's about their potential as well, right? So to ability to, their ability to continuously improve and remain relevant is what makes an employee truly valuable in the long run. And that is what organizations look to need to look at instead of only focusing on skills, right? Lastly, another aspect that we have here is that, skills can't replace, leadership and passion, right? So talented people, they have a strong tendency to inspire other people, and they can make really good or big impact through their, influence, right? So this impact cannot be only through skills, but, with their other abilities, like their ability to lead or their ability to motivate others, right? So these are the other factors that organization needs to keep in mind while they're undergoing this skill-based transformation. right? So as we continue to think about talent in the organizations, let's remember that skills is just, one piece of the puzzle, right? So the quality, that makes an employee or a candidate truly valuable go much beyond skills, and those are the additional factors enterprises and organizations need to consider, when they are undergoing the skill-based transformation. Now, Sharath, we have been discussing a lot about the challenges, right? So a lot of challenges we have discussed that the organizations are facing, right? So, can you talk a little bit about, what can be the possible next steps or the possible solutions for organizations to overcome these challenges that we have been discussing in the previous section?
Sure, Varun. I think the benefits of this approach is clear to everyone, right? But we have received many questions from organizations on how to become a skills-based organization right off the bat, right? How can I implement skills logic across the organization and so on, right? While it is definitely an ideal state to wish for, it's not easy, right? As you mentioned, there are a lot of challenges in the way, right? So we have seen multiple approaches being tested out by organizations, right? So our suggestion is that organizations should take a pragmatic approach, right? We have seen organizations taking a short-term view to leverage skills in some shape or form, right? In parts of their business or parts of the hire to retire life cycle, right? Where they see the most impact, right? Then over the course of time, they monitor, they document the challenges, they scale up and become an organization where skills is being leveraged across the organization, right? So while it's ambitious and good to have that ambition in mind and aspiration to become a skills-based organization, organizations should understand the size, their complexity, their objective, what sort of buy-in they have from other stakeholders within the organization, and take the right approach for them, right? Right, and this is also very important to keep in mind that there needs to be a change in technology. There needs to be a change in leadership perspective and organizational strategy if you have to overcome all these challenges and become truly skills-based, right? And we have been talking a lot about strategy and how to go about the entire process. So one of the important things is having a pragmatic approach, a systematic way of thinking, right? So we at Everest Group have designed a 4D framework, right, to help organizations understand how to go about this approach, right? So I'll just quickly walk you through this framework, right? So it all starts with defining the problem statement, right? And the challenges that can be addressed by this transformation. What are your current objectives? Where are you facing the maximum challenge, right? For example, it could be anything to do with talent scarcity, right? Then you need to figure out, hey, where am I facing this talent scarcity the most? For what skill set? Or for which department or which geography, so to say, right? So you have everything defined from a scope perspective. Then you think about establishing certain metrics to track the effectiveness of the initiative, right? Which is again linked to the problem of talent scarcity, for example, right? So think about time to hire. If it's an internal, mobility sort of a situation, how easy was it to find the relevant people within my organization? Over the course of time, you can even measure employee satisfaction, attrition rates. If they really feel like they want to be in this organization, are they getting the right opportunities to grow their skill sets and apply to the right opportunities within the organization and so on, right? So ideally, the first step should be defining what you want to achieve, where you want to implement this approach at the beginning, right? Then when you look at design, there are two aspects to this. One is a technology design aspect to it, and the other one is process design aspect to this, right? From a technology perspective, you definitely need to have a robust skills taxonomy and ontology that can be that is relevant, robust, comprehensive across the organization, that can be used across the organization, right? The other one is identifying those processes within your problem statement, right? Where you can actually bring in skills, right? So what all touch points do you need to change? Do you need to modify in order to bring in that skills-based logic and application within that process, right? Along with this, we also have to think about how do you create a robust data strategy encompassing different data sources, governance mechanism, and integration with the tech ecosystem, right? We just discussed that all these large organizations, they use multiple SaaS applications on a day-to-day basis, and employees' skill sets might be there in different places, right? So how do you integrate your tech ecosystem to enable this seamless usage of skills across the board, right? Then you also have to design the skills ecosystem by identifying gaps in the existing processes, right? Where can you bring in skills? Where can you sort of strengthen it more and so on, right? Once you have that mental image and of course on a paper as well, right? So how things will look like, you need to think about, hey, how do I bring in the tech aspect to it, right? From a deployment perspective, there are many options in front of the organization, right? They can look internally, see if they have the relevant expertise from an IT, from a technology standpoint. Hey, can I get my people to build some good, robust tech infrastructure to enable all of this, right? Or should I just go out in the market and conduct a provider evaluation, right? Considering my requirements currently, as well as what I might need in the future, right? So we'll have to look at scalability, functionality, compatibility with your tech ecosystem, as well as what is the ROI that you will get from the product, right? So you can think about it in both in-house as well as sort of third-party vendor standpoint, right? Then you establish a detailed implementation and integration plan, and you think about launching it in a high impact area. You monitor it, you understand the value that it's generating, and you sort of communicate the value across the organization, right? But again, like I mentioned, this is sort of good in the short and midterm, where you're looking at one problem statement and one high impact area, right? But if you really want to scale up and take it organization wide, then you need to do the fourth D, which is the develop, right? So you need to develop a skills first approach as part of the organization culture, right? It should be something that is embedded within the way you work, right? And there are multiple ways to do it. You need the key champion and the driver to be somebody from the business side, right? Who is really engaged, who is willing to work with the HR, with the IT teams, with the people analytics teams to execute this, make it something that is ingrained, right? So again, if you look at your pilot in the high impact area, you need to gather and analyze feedback to understand the challenges that you faced, what are the best practices that you followed, and then identify new use cases across the organization, right? And that is where the role of strategy groups or center of excellence also come into play, right? Now, many organizations have experimented with different types of org structures. There are cases where there's a centralized skills center of excellence, there's a chief skills officer sort of holding the baton and getting things executed. But we've also seen decentralized center of excellence, right? Where each business unit has certain people dedicated to skills transformation within their business units as well, right? So there are many approaches that organizations can consider here, right? Now, one of the important things that we want to touch upon is the role of technology in everything, right? In all of this, right? So we have been doing some research on the skills intelligence platform space. We have interacted with more than 50 different tech providers who are operating in this space and helping organizations on this journey, right? the way we look at the skills intelligence platform space is, you need to have certain core capabilities and then certain extended capabilities, right? So from a core capability perspective, we expect these platforms to bring in their own skills ontology, which is again the taxonomy and the adjacency relationship mapping between the skill sets, right? We also expect this platform to have some sort of data management capabilities, right? So this could be, do they have the ability to build employee skills profiles, right? Are they able to infer employee skill sets, or are they able to survey employees to understand their skills, right? Or does it provide a user interface for employees to self-declare their skills and managers can come and sort of validate it, and so on, right? It could also include aspects around managing the ontology, right? Does the product offer customizable interfaces for organizations to modify the taxonomy, add new skill sets that may be relevant to them, or remove certain skill sets that might not be relevant to them, right? I think the slides got moved, but okay. So yeah, there are different providers who are entering this category in different directions, right? So the top of my mind, there are like 4 to 5 different categories of providers that are helping organizations here, right? One is the HCMs of the world, right? Like Workday, Oracle, SAP, who are building skills-related capabilities within their overall ecosystem to capitalize on the growing demand, right? The second category would be specialized firms that are focusing on core skills capabilities, such as skills engine, API, or just the insights, analytics, or the architecture part of it, right? Without a lot of front end or UI UX functionality for the end users, right? The third category of solutions would be point solutions that address specific use cases within the skills value chain, such as skills assessments, verification, inferencing, or just the insights part of it, right? There are other categories such as platform-based solutions that address specific use cases across talent acquisition or talent management. For example, candidate relationship management vendors, CRM vendors, right? Or internal talent marketplaces, learning experience platforms, skills-based strategic workforce planning software, and so on, right? There are also another category of providers that are again platform-based, but they address multiple solutions across talent acquisition and talent management, right? For example, there are vendors who may be able to support internal talent marketplaces as well as recruitment use cases, right? And they're doing a lot of innovation. It's happening in various forms. So it is more critical for organizations to understand how to go about the entire process about understanding what technology to buy, and what is the right way to select them, how to roll out the RFP, and so on, right? So Varun, the next question is for you, right? I know you have been talking to a lot of organizations recently, right? Do you have any interesting example that you would like to call out?
Yeah, sure. So this is a very interesting example, that came up in our recent conversation, Sharat. So, this was a technology company, right? So they have been struggling with the talent scarcity problem from some time, right? So let's discuss, how they leverage the 4D framework to solve this particular problem, right? So the first step was that, they defined, or rather they identified the areas in which they were facing this particular issue, right? So when we say define, they didn't restrict themselves to identifying their roles, that were being impacted, right? So where they were facing talent crunch, they also identified certain processes or certain use cases or some of the departments which were getting affected because of the talent scarcity, right? So once they identified the problem areas, right? So the next step that they did was to design the ecosystem, right? So the organization carried out an as-is to be assessment, right? So which helped them to identify the gaps that are there in their existing processes and how skill-based approach can essentially bridge these gaps, right? So think of it as an example that let's say this as-is assessment helped them understand that, okay, their hiring processes has some issue, and how skills can act as a catalyst or act as a bridge to bridge the gap that is there between the hiring processes, and the company would be able to make better hiring decisions, right? So secondly is around technology, right? So like Sharath has been discussing this for quite some time now, right? So technology is also a critical aspect, right? So this particular organization identified the areas where they needed to enhance or improve their existing tech stack, right? So when they initially did the as assessment, they also evaluated their existing tech stack, right? So how much ready are they in terms of their existing tech stack? What sort of upgradations is required, right? And then accordingly, they identify, do they need to develop a dedicated platform for skills intelligence, or do they need to have a point solution? And if yes for a point solution, for what particular use case do they need to have a point solution? So, this particular organization, they also identified, which areas do they need to improve their existing tech stack, right? So here only, they took a call on, whether they want to develop these capabilities in-house or they want to leverage a third-party vendor for creating this particular skills ecosystem. Now, once all of this was in place, right, and the organization has designed a solution for them, right? So the next step, the next step for them is deployment, right? So now this particular skills intelligence, company or platform, or that they have created, right? So let's say they are either built it in-house, or maybe they're leveraging a third-party vendor, right? So they made this skills intelligence platform as a single source of truth for their overall HR and talent value chain, right? So it became a centralized source for all the skills related matters that the organization is taking, right? So there was an appropriate system also in place to help and manage, or maybe update the skills data whenever required, right? So the all this organization also ensured that this system is very well integrated into their existing tech stack, right? So as you might be aware, right? So how complex the overall HR and talent value chain has become. There are so many point solutions and platforms that are out there in the market which are being leveraged by the HR functions, right? So one critical aspect for them was to ensure that the skill-based engine is compatible and the data between the skill-based system and other platforms flows seamlessly, right? So that is another thing that they did, right? Next interesting thing that they did was, establish some of the KPIs which can help them to track their performance at an initial stage, right? Some of these KPIs can be very, very direct things around, reduction in time to hire, or number of openings that have been filled by internal mobility compared to talent being sourced from outside, and some of the KPIs that they defined were more indirect. These could be around employee satisfaction or things like that, right? So now once the organization has established a comprehensive skills intelligence platform and integrated it with their other tech elements, right? So the next step is to analyze the initial set of KPIs data that they're receiving, right? So they started doing that by collating and analyzing all the KPIs that they were tracking, and they try to course correct at an early stage, and reduce errors wherever possible. So again, Sharath, this was a one-off example, right? So skill-based transformation, or the approach of skill-based transformation, is very unique and very nuanced, right? Every organization has completely different requirements. Every organization is very unique in its own nature, right? So, this particular approach, so for this particular approach, it worked well for them, but it can be the case that this approach might not work well for other organizations, right? So at a broad level, what I've done is I've listed down some of the categories of organization and what could be some of the best practices on how they can approach the overall skills transformation. So the next slide, like I talked about, right? So these are some of the high level approaches that the organizations can take, right? So for a small organization, right? So small organization, you don't need to start big to see the results, right? So small organizations can start small, right? So it can mean that they can start by focusing on, let's say, a very specific skill category or very specific issues that they are facing, or the issues that are impacting their business the most, right? Another thing is that these smaller firms have a very closely knit teams, right? So the organization leadership can also use it to their advantage, and they can drive the skill-based transformation. On the other hand, for some of the mid and large size firms, right? So this approach becomes slightly more tactical, right? So you don't have to transform everything all at once, right? So the ideal approach for some of the small to large size firms could be selective focus on key areas, right? So these key areas can be anything. Let's say you can start off with candidate assessment, you can start off with internal mobility, etc., right? So this can help you, gain some of the competitive advantage, right? So through this way, what you can do is you can start seeing improvement in some of the areas which are being impacted the most, right? And then accordingly, once you start seeing the benefits and start seeing the improvements in these areas, you can spread this transformation across other departments and other regions of your organization, and then carry out an organization-wide transformation. Now, for Fortune 500 companies, right? So this approach needs to be a bit more strategic, right? Because of the type of organizations they are and the scale at which they operate, right? So this approach goes beyond maybe training programs. Essentially, these approaches go beyond piecemeal efforts, right? So it requires organization to integrate skills development into the very core of their business operations, right? So this becomes a very critical step for all the Fortune 500 companies, right? So one critical element, to establishing this particular concept is around establishing center of excellences. Now, these center of excellences are very crucial for delivery of, of excellence and consistency across departments and geographies. And, with these center of excellences in place, the organizations can ensure that the right sets of skills are being developed at the right scale and at the right point of time, and these skills that the organization is developing, they align with the overall organization strategic goals. Now, the next crucial element is to have strong leadership, right? So the people aspect that Sharath and I have been talking about quite a lot in last few minutes is that a leadership at all levels are also required to actively support and promote skills development throughout the organization. This can or cannot mean updating the roles and responsibilities of people across the organization, or having some direct incentives to ensure people like frontline managers or leadership, they have an incentive to be the forerunner or the front runner of the skill-based transformation journey that the organization is going. So by taking these approach, right, so organization, can ensure that they can remain at the forefront of innovation when it comes to skills. And like I said before, there is no approach that will work for all the organization. It's a very nuanced approach, right? The example which we discussed on previous slide, that was very specific for a technology company. Their requirements were very different. But at an overall level, these are the three broad type of approaches that we have listed down for the organization types that are trying to undergo skill-based transformation. Now, that brings us to the second poll question, which is around how ready is your organization to adopt a skill-based approach? The skill-based approach is required to streamline the talent acquisition and the talent management processes. So how ready is your organization? Sharath, any surprises in the results? I mean, for me, there are people who are saying that they are not very ready or not at all ready, not a surprise, but I think majority of the audience is saying that they are somewhat ready.
Yeah, there is nobody who is very ready, which is understandable, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so based on our responses, definitely like Sharad said, most of the people think that they are somewhat ready, but then still there is a huge chunk of people who are not very ready or not at all ready to adopt this skill-based approach for streamlining talent acquisition and talent management processes. So yeah, so before we get into the last section of our discussion, that is around question and answers, right? So I just quickly wanted to mention that if you have any questions or any queries regarding skills intelligence, right? So be it something like what steps that as an enterprise need to take to embark this journey, if you need to build your skills intelligence platform in-house, or do you want to leverage third party, or what sort of third party vendors are out there in the market, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email IDs is there on the screen itself, and we would be very happy to get on a call to share our perspectives on any questions that you have. And of course, that goes on without saying, we will be sharing a copy of these slides with you, that we are presenting today, and you will get it soon after the webinar ends. So, Sharad, I think with that, we can move to the question and answers round.
Sure.
So, let me quickly go through the questions that we have. So, the first question, Sharad, that I can read is, and I think it's a pretty interesting one, is around, how does a company know, when they need to conduct a skill-based transformation? So it's an interesting, question. So Sharath, I'll take a first stab, and please feel free to add your perspective as well. So, what I think is that, there are several indicators, right? So it's not a single indicator, or it's not a framework that can help you decide if you are ready to undergo a skill-based transformation, right? So first of all, you need to understand that, skill-based transformation might not be relevant for all the organizations, right? Some organizations are slightly ahead in their journey, while some organizations, it might take some time to reach at that level where they require to undergo skill-based transformation. So there are multiple indicators that the organizations need to be on lookout for, right? So few of the indicators could be, the first one and the foremost one is around, talent scarcity that we have discussed earlier as well, right? So difficulty in hiring talent for niche roles is something which could be, one of the first indicator to, consider, right? So these niche roles can be, some of the next gen roles, things like Python developers, prompt engineers, AI engineers, etc., right? So the difficulty in hiring for these roles for, or scarcity for these roles is somewhat more prominent when it compared to other roles in your overall organization. Then it could be a good indicator that you can start considering skill-based transformation. Next is can be performance, right? So if you are experiencing, persistent feedback from employees and performance managers that there has been a decline in employee performance, right? So it can be a good sign to reimagine your learning and development practices and include a skill-based element in your learning and development program. There are other indicators as well, right? So things around, you can conduct a skill gap analysis. It is more like a skills audit, right? So this can help you identify the discrepancies that are there between the, skills that your employees are possessing, and the skills that are required for them to succeed in their role. So this can help an organization understand, how mature they are, right? And accordingly, they can take a call if they want to undergo a skill-based transformation. Employee feedback, another point that they can think of, right? So it can be captured through employee surveys, engagement surveys, right? So organizations can gauge, if their existing policies or existing, methods around learning and development and other aspects are sufficient, or they need to undergo a skill-based transformation. Net, there are several signs which organization can keep a close eye on, right? But one thing they have to remember is that, like I said earlier, not every organizations might need to undergo skill transformation at this point of time, right? So for them, it can be a matter of time as well, where they are, not ready for undergoing this transformation. But it's always important for organizations to keep a close eye on these indicators. Sharath, do you want to add anything here?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well, Varun. So I can pick up the next question. I found something that is really, got me thinking. Right? It's around, of course, skills and everything is great, but what are the cons that HR leaders need to be aware as they embark on this journey, right? Yeah, I mean, of course, there are a lot of good things that can come out of becoming skills-based organization and so on. But there are few things that leaders should keep in mind, right? One is, there shouldn't be an overemphasis on technical skills, right? We understand that it might be easier to identify and assess, while interpersonal or soft skills may not be that easy to identify and assess, right? So in those skill sets should not be devalued, right? If there is overemphasis on technical skills and so on, right? The other con is the organization should be aware of bias in skills inferencing or skill assessment, right? While technology and AI can be a great tool to have in identifying from various sources, such as project management tools, resumes, if they have self-declared certain skill sets, or if they have taken feedback from their managers, or we have seen interesting cases where reward and recognition tools have been used as a great source of skills for employees based on the recognition that they get from their peers and manager and so on, right? So of course, there's a lot of places through which data can be collected, but it should be made sure that there is some human in the loop or some explainability on how the model has assessed or evaluated a particular individual's skills, not just the skills, but also skill levels or the proficiency, right? So you could be a beginner, you could be intermediate, expert, right? So if you're using technology to assess these things, you need to have some sort of an explainability or some way to sort of monitor this, right? Yeah, I mean, these are the two things that I would definitely keep on top of your mind, right? Of my mind, if I'm thinking of any cons. Anything from your side, Varun?
No, Sharath, I think you covered it all right. So, there are a lot of other elements that goes beyond skills, right? So these could be, like you mentioned, things around cultural fitment, potential. So these could be some of the other elements which can get overlooked, let's say if you're doing a skill-based hiring decision or if you're doing a skill-based internal mobility. So no other point, but I think you summed it up very well. So I think we are at the top of our for allotted time as well. So thanks a lot everyone for joining us today for this webinar. Like I said, you'll receive a copy of the slides that we have presented today. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again for your participation.